The London music scene was blossoming in 1964. Clubs like the Marquee, Crawdaddy, and Ricky Tick were packed with fans brimming with enthusiasm, ready to discover the next up-and-coming band. Audiences would pack the clubs to hear Eric Clapton's latest fiery blues improvisation. Before long, the Yardbirds found For Your Love and knew they had a hit. So why was Eric's hand forced just as they were taking off? And who was behind the decision that he says left him distraught? In his autobiography, Eric describes the privilege of finally being a full-time musician with the Yardbirds. So what went wrong? Let's find out. In 1963, Thursday night was blues night at the Marquee Club, where everyone in the R&B scene hung out. That's where Eric first met the Rolling Stones when he went to see Alexis Corner play. He would stand in for Mick from time to time and sometimes borrowed his Reslo microphone, which Mick kept in his pocket. The Crawdaddy was another club owned by Giorgio Gomelsky, who gave the Stones a residency and championed them in their early days. This is where they really took off. Clapton writes of their fast-growing fan base. In 4 weeks, they went from a handful of people to hundreds. However, in just a few short months, the Stones were signed by Andrew Loog Oldham, leaving Giorgio and the Crawdaddy without their biggest draw. Giorgio felt blindsided and looked to find someone to fill their spot. He would soon focus his attention on the Yardbirds. While the Rolling Stones had moved on to touring with Bo Diddley, playing their first single, Come On, Eric Clapton was working for his grandfather, laying plaster, after leaving art school at the school's request. One night at a party in Kingston, Eric is listening to Keith Relf sing when he says Keith eventually approached him, introduced himself, and invited him to the Crawdaddy to see his band, the Yardbirds, play. "We're playing on Sunday night, but our guitarist is only 17. His mother's hell-bent on him leaving the band to focus on his studies. Maybe you can take his spot if he leaves. Come by and see what you think." Eric does just that, and before long, the guitarist does quit, and Eric is now the lead guitarist for the Yardbirds. He says, "For the first time in my life, I had a full-time job as a musician, and I could quit working for my grandfather." This was important for him as his last 2 attempts to be in a band didn't work out, and after being rejected from art school, he finally had something he could call his own. In October '63, they went to Keith Relf's house to sign the contract, and you might be surprised to learn, with all their parents present to oversee. Eric was 18 years old at the time. Giorgio soon rented a house for the band to live together, where each shared a room with another bandmate. Eric roomed with Chris Draja, who he describes as quiet, shy, and kind, saying, "I trusted him completely, which was rare for me." It's important to mention this because of Eric's unusual childhood. He grew up believing the grandparents who raised him were his parents, while his sister was actually his mother. He accidentally discovered the truth at age 9, a revelation that would play a lifelong role in his identity and relationship struggles, which may have also contributed to his issues with the Yardbirds. At that time, having a child out of wedlock was not at all acceptable, so they had to keep it a secret to protect the family. The Yardbirds started playing gigs at all the clubs they could get booked in. Eric says the first 3 months they played 33 gigs, and saying what he originally liked about being in the Yardbirds was, "Our entire reason for existence was to honor the tradition of the blues." They only did covers, with their most popular being Smokestack Lightning by Howlin' Wolf. They also covered Sonny Boy Williamson's song Good Morning Little Schoolgirl. So when Giorgio told them he booked them to open for Sonny Boy's upcoming tour of England, Eric should have been pleased, right? Not quite. He describes himself as the blues expert of Ripley, and since he knew that the original Sonny Boy Williamson was stabbed to death with an ice pick, and this was not the actual guy who wrote the song, he couldn't wait to let this guy know he knew once they met him. Upon meeting, Eric says to him, "Your real name's not Sonny Boy Williamson, is it? It's actually Rice Miller." The guy gets right up in Eric's face and pulls out a small penknife. "Don't you ever talk to me like that. Who the hell do you think you are?" Eric shut up from that point on. The entire situation went beyond strange, as Sonny Boy later made them all get down and kneel while he did what Eric describes as a blues moonwalk. You'll have to try and envision that one. He later made a hilarious comment about the Yardbirds that they did not soon forget. "Those English kids want to play the blues so bad, and they play the blues so bad." This must have been one of the most entertaining experiences of their young lives. Later, when Giorgio, who was still attempting to outdo the Stones, got them signed with Columbia Records to record a cover of "I Wish You Would," Eric says he began to develop a blues purist mindset, believing that the blues should only be played live and that records were too commercial. In his mind, bands like the Animals, Manfred Mann, and the Moody Blues were far better live than on their records. He was much happier with the Yardbirds' first LP, 5 Live Yardbirds, which he describes as raw and quite groundbreaking. They developed a following in the clubs they played around South England, becoming well known for improvisations, taking 3-minute songs and stretching them out to 5 or 6 minutes. This is when Eric's nickname emerged. He would use a very thin first guitar string in order to bend the notes, but it would often break, leaving him to have to change it while the audience waited. They would become impatient and began slow clapping while he changed the string, leading Giorgio to come up with the nickname Slow Hand Clapton. Their hard work was beginning to pay off. In August '64, their 136th gig, the Yardbirds closed the Richmond Blues and Jazz Festival while the Rolling Stones had opened it. By the end of '64, they were doing package tours with American acts such as the Ronettes. Ronnie Spector set her sights on Eric, telling him that he reminded her of her husband Phil Spector. They started a raging affair, and Eric says he fell head over heels in love with her. One night at the end of the tour, he was hanging around her hotel hoping to see her. As he made his way towards her room, he heard voices as the door opened. He sees Ronnie and another member of the Ronettes on the arms of Mick and Keith. Eric describes himself as utterly heartbroken. Around this time, Eric begins what he calls his intellectual phase, taking himself too seriously and becoming critical of any musician who was not serious about playing pure blues. He begins reading Baudelaire, Kerouac, and Ginsberg while watching French New Wave cinema. It's around this time he says he begins to feel uncomfortable being in the Yardbirds. This cognitive dissonance he is experiencing would have a major impact on his career, both good and bad. The band is pushing hard to come up with their #1 hit so they could really take off and compete with other successful bands. Around this time, Paul Samuel Smith came up with a song by Graham Gouldman called "For Your Love." They all knew they had a hit on their hands. Everyone was so excited, except Eric. He says he balked at the song, saying he played a very limited short blues riff, but he felt they had completely sold out. For your love. For your love. As a consolation, they gave him the B-side with "Got to Hurry," in which Giorgio gave himself writing credit as "Oh Rasputin."
Through most of my youth, that my back was against the wall, and that the only way to survive that was with dignity and pride and with courage. And I heard that in certain forms of music. I heard it most of all in the blues, because that was an individual. It was always one man, or with his guitar versus the world. And it wasn't a company, it wasn't a band or a group or anything. It was, when it came down to it, it was one guy who was completely alone and had no options, no alternatives whatsoever other than just sing and play to ease his pain. And that echoed what I felt in many aspects of my life.
As Eric entered into his winter of discontent, he became disgruntled with everyone and everything in the Yardbirds, creating tension between him and the band. Finally, one day, Giorgio calls him into his Soho office. "Look, Eric, it's quite obvious you're unhappy being in the band. It's bringing everyone down." Eric describes the moment. "He didn't exactly fire me, he just invited me to resign. Totally disillusioned at that point, I was ready to quit the music industry altogether." While he technically resigned, management steered him towards the decision since his unhappiness was poisoning the group's morale and therefore momentum. Clapton was effectively forced to make a decision because his strict devotion to blues clashed with the Yardbirds' desire for commercial success. He describes himself as distraught afterwards. This was surprising since the story's always been that he just left, no longer able to bear the pop direction they were taking, making it sound like he was relieved. While it was heading that way anyway, he may have just needed a little push to help him make the decision. So that was it. He left the Yardbirds feeling the same rejection he felt when he was forced to leave art school. Eric became downtrodden while everyone around him seemed to be finding great success in music. While the Yardbirds were enjoying their number 3 hit, For Your Love, Eric, who played on the record, was living back at home, totally immersed in The Lord of the Rings. However, we now know he was really quite right to feel uneasy about his future with the Yardbirds. At the time, it may have seemed like he was blowing a once-in-a-lifetime chance, but in retrospect, by not ignoring his own instincts, he created his life's work while staying true to what he believed in at the time. This was instinct defying logic. Clapton chose the blues even as the world was choosing pop. While the Yardbirds were incredibly influential, they eventually disbanded after chasing hits, despite having some of the most gifted musicians to ever play. Few bands can rival the Yardbirds in the legacy they left behind, yet it's hard to imagine Eric Clapton trying to make a career of pop songs with the Yardbirds, which is how many of those early bands faded away. One of the most interesting takeaways from the book is his ability to own up to his own problematic behavior, much of which may point back to uncovering that family secret at such a tender age, certain to have left him confused. I mean, how could it not? Finally, Eric's thoughts in the interview on creating music alone as a method of healing was very revealing and shed some light on the path he was pulled to take throughout his career.
Well, I really didn't change as much as you probably think, because it's not really, an individual change. I was just put into a different context. So, I mean, the things that I was doing reflected differently, I mean, the context of the Yardbirds as opposed to John Mayer, is totally different. One is pop and one is, was then even more earthier blues than it is now, the stuff he played then. And, it was just, I just played the same things, but they just sounded different.
Maybe he found inspiration in reading Gandalf's words in Lord of the Rings. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. Before long, someone would introduce him to John Mayall, and he would soon find himself with a new opportunity to immerse himself with a fellow bluesman.
Eric, he already had a sort of tendency to dandyism, he had kind of like crew cut when everybody had long hair, he had long hair when everybody had crew cut, he had this Ivy League idea, and he was kind of a delicate, some sort of elegant, sort of delicate, long fingers, and sort of a good player.